My children brought a cake to the place where they left me. Store-bought. Grocery store frosting, the kind with the shortening that coats your teeth. My daughter Camille set it on the nightstand at Willow Bend Memory Care and said, "Just 30 days, Mama, till we get the kitchen up to code." My son Desmond stood by the window with his hands in his pockets and looked at the parking lot like he'd never seen asphalt before. My youngest, Nadia, cried into a tissue she'd brought with her. Already folded, already ready. Down the hall a woman was calling for somebody named Bernard, who wasn't coming. And I sat on a bed, with a plastic mattress cover under the sheet, and let them believe they'd finally put the old woman somewhere she couldn't ask questions about the trademark, or the lease, or the money that had been leaking out of Mabry and Daughters for 2 years like water from a cracked pipe. 3 days later, not one supplier in Chatham County would deliver a sack of flour to my own bakery, and my children found out that the mother they'd filed away hadn't been misplaced. She'd been keeping receipts. If this story reaches something in you, please like this video and subscribe. And tell me, what would you have done in my shoes? Leave a comment with your thoughts, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your city right now. My name is Rosalind Mabry. I'm 69 years old, and for 38 of those years, I got up at 10 minutes to 4 in the morning, 6 days a week, in a red brick building on Drayton Street in Savannah, Georgia, and I made bread. Before that, I was a girl who thought she'd married a steady man. Roy Mabry was a long-haul driver with good hands and a good laugh, and a way of making you feel like the only radio station he wanted to hear. We had Camille in 1982, Desmond in 1985, Nadia in 1989, and in the spring of 1990, Roy went out for a run to Jacksonville and just kept going. People always want a dramatic story. They want another woman, or a wreck, or a bar fight. There wasn't one. There was a man who found the shape of his life too tight around the shoulders, and one Tuesday he took it off and left it in the closet with the rest of us in it. Nadia, 8 months old. Camille was 8. Desmond was 5. I had $411, a Buick that leaked oil, and a mother-in-law in Pooler who would keep the children while I worked, but who never once said Roy's name to me again as long as she lived. I'd worked in kitchens since I was 17. Hospital cafeteria first, then a hotel, then a diner on Abercorn where the owner let me come in early and use the ovens for my own bread if I cleaned up after. That's where I started selling 6 loaves at a time out of a laundry basket lined with a dish towel to the nurses coming off shift at Candler. The first oven I ever owned came out of a shuttered Greek restaurant on Bull Street. It was a Blodgett deck oven, cream enamel, and it had a hairline crack in the left door glass shaped like a question mark. I paid $225 for it, and $80 more to have it hauled. It took 4 men to get it into that brick building. 2 of them were high school boys who worked for pizza. I nursed Nadia in the back office of that bakery, with the door cracked so I could hear the timer. Now, I want to be honest with you about something, because this story does not work if I lie to you at the beginning. I raised those 3 children the way a person raises anything they're afraid of losing. Too tight. Too close. I made myself the floor under their feet, and then I got surprised, 40 years later, that they walked on me. Camille was 8 when her daddy left, and by the time she was 11, she was the one making sure Desmond did his math worksheet, and Nadia had her shoes on the right feet. I let her. God forgive me, I let her. Because it meant I could take the 6 a.m. delivery, and the 11 a.m. rush, and the 2 p.m. catering call. I didn't give my oldest daughter a childhood. I gave her a clipboard. Desmond, I gave something worse. I gave him rescue. He was 19 the first time. He came into the bakery on a Thursday afternoon in November, sat on an upturned bread crate, and told me he'd gotten into some trouble on a football game. $6,000. To a man who had a name and a phone number and a very calm voice. I remember the flour on my forearms. I remember the way the mixer sounded, that low knock the old Hobart made on the 4th speed. I remember writing the check on the prep table and my pen going through the paper a little because the surface was, and I remember his face when he took it. That's the part I've never told anybody. I expected shame. I was ready for shame. I would have known what to do with shame. What I saw was relief. He let out a breath, and his shoulders came down. and something in his face went smooth and easy. And he said, "You're the best, Mama," and kissed the top of my head, and went out the back door into the alley whistling. 19 years old, $6,000 of somebody else's money, owed to a man with a calm voice. And my boy walked out of my bakery whistling, because the world had just confirmed for him, in ink, that there would always be a check on the prep table. I stood there with the mixer knocking, and I knew. Right then. I want to be very clear with you, because a lot of people are going to watch this and think, how did that woman not see it coming? I saw it coming. I just decided, standing in the flower dust at 2:20 in the afternoon, that I would rather be used than be alone. That's the whole secret. That's the mechanism of every single thing that happened to me over the next 40 years. Not blindness. Not senility. A choice, made once and then made again 1,000 more times, so quietly I stopped hearing myself make it. Mabry and Daughters got its name in 1994, when Camille was 12, because she asked why the sign didn't have her on it. Desmond was standing right there. I've thought about that a lot since. I named the business after a promise to my girls, and my son heard me do it, and I never once explained. By 2015, we had the Drayton Street store and a stall at the farmer's market and a wholesale account with 4 restaurants. 22 employees at Christmas. I was on the radio once. There's a picture of me in the Savannah Morning News in 2011, standing in front of the proofing rack with my hair wrapped, looking about as tired as a person can look and still be smiling. I registered the name with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office in 2013. Cost me around $300, and a lot of paperwork, and Camille laughed at me for it. She said, "Mama, nobody's stealing biscuits." Hold on to that. The children came back one by one, the way they do. Camille first, in 2016, after she got laid off from an ad agency in Atlanta. She came in as director of brand. She was good. I want to say that plainly, because it would be easier to tell to you she was useless. She wasn't. She got us into 3 hotels and onto a food show, and she doubled the catering side in 18 months. She also repainted the front room a color she called grage, and took my husband's name off the deposit slips and imprinted new business cards that said Mabry. Established 1988, in a thin gray font, like we were a law firm. Desmond came in 2018, after the restaurant group he'd invested in folded. He handled operations, which meant he handled the vendors and the bank, and he was very, very charming to both. Nadia never came in at all. Nadia lived in Asheville and made ceramics and posted photographs of them and cashed the $1,200 I put in her account on the first of every month for 11 years, and told people she was estranged from her family in a way that made her sound brave at parties. I loved them. I want to be understood on this. I loved them the way you love the thing you built, which is to say I could not see where they ended, and my own work began. The first thing that went wrong was a number. October 2023. I was doing the wholesale reconciliation myself because our bookkeeper had gone out on maternity leave, and I found a payment to a company called Tybee Coastal Consulting, $11,000. Then another one in July. Then one in March. I asked Desmond about it in the back office with the door open. He didn't blink. That's what I noticed. He explained it the way you'd explain a light switch to a child. Patient, warm, a little amused. Vendor consolidation, freight brokerage, a pass-through entity. Restructuring the flour and dairy contracts to get better net 30 terms. "Mama, you don't want to be doing spreadsheets," he said. "You want to be making bread." He'd learned that. Somewhere in those years, my son had learned that the fastest way to get me to stop asking was to remind me that I was the one who touched the dough. He'd found the door in me, and he'd learned which key it took. I said all right. I said all right for 11 months. In September of last year, I fell in the kitchen. I want to describe it accurately, because everything my children built, they built on top of this. The floor drained by the sheeter had a grate that sat a 1/4 inch proud. It had for years. I stepped wrong coming around the rack with a tray of proofed rolls, and I went down on my left hip, and the rolls went everywhere. And Marisol Reyes, who has run my morning bench for 16 years, came around the corner and hauled me up by the elbow. And we both laughed because I was more upset about the rolls. I was bruised. I was not hurt. I did not hit my head. I drove myself home. Marisol told Camille because Marisol tells Camille everything, and she's not wrong to, and I've never held it against her. Camille came the next morning with 2 coffees and sat across from me at my own kitchen table and said, "Mama, I think it's time we talked about what happens next." That sentence. If you ever hear that sentence from a grown child while they are holding a coffee they bought you, sit up straight. The dinner was 3 weeks later. They did it at Camille's house in Ardsley Park, which is a beautiful house I paid the down payment on. She'd made a roast. Her husband, Anthony Pryor, who is a decent enough man, and a coward in the specific way that decent men are, kept getting up to check on things that did not need checking. My granddaughter Junie was there, 16 years old, on her phone, wearing her father's flannel shirt. Nadia had driven down from Asheville. That alone should have told me. They let me finish my plate. I'll give them that. Then Camille set down her wine and said, "Have you thought any more about stepping back from the day-to-day?" I said, "Stepping back from what, exactly?" And out it came, the way it always comes, in that language they'd all learned somewhere. Bandwidth. Succession. Right-sizing. The building's got issues, Mama. The hood system's out of code, the insurance carriers. Asking 69. Nobody expects you to be pulling 4 a.m. Desmond said, "We're not taking anything. We're protecting it." Nadia said, "We just want you to rest." And cried, and I watched my youngest daughter cry with her chin up, so the light caught her face, and I thought, in a cold, clean corner of my mind that I did not know I had, she is performing. And then Camille said the thing. She said, "Mama, you gave Marisol a raise in July, and you gave her another one in August, and you don't remember." I did remember. I'd given Marisol a raise in July because she'd been running the bench alone. And in August because she took on the wholesale schedule. 2 raises, 2 reasons, 2 entries in the same payroll system Camille had access to. But I watched my daughter say it, and I watched Anthony look at his plate, and I watched Nadia dab her eyes, and I understood something with my whole body. They were not worried about my memory. They were building a record. Junie looked up from her phone. 16 years old. She looked at her mother, and then she looked at me, and she didn't say a word. Now, here's where a lot of you are going to get angry with me. Some of you already are. I know, because I've heard it from my own sister, and I've heard it from the woman who does my hair. Why did you sign anything? Because I signed everything. Let me tell you what I did the next morning. At 6:40 a.m., I called Gideon Ashford, who has been my attorney since 1996, when he was a kid in a bad suit doing my first commercial lease. He is 72 now, and he takes his coffee black, and he says almost nothing until he's ready. I told him about the dinner. I told him about Tybee Coastal Consulting. I told him about the raises and the record. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Rosalind, are you telling me you want to fight them?" I said, "No, I'm telling you I want to know." And Gideon said something I have thought about every day since. He said, "Then don't defend yourself. People stop hiding things from you the minute they believe they've won." So I let them win. Over the next 4 months, I signed 16 documents my children put in front of me. I signed a limited healthcare release. I signed a facility intake questionnaire. I signed a consent to share medical records with immediate family. I signed a temporary residence agreement with Willow Bend. I signed an authorization for my daughter to discuss my accounts with Coastal Georgia Community Bank. I signed a change to the operating agreement of Mabry and Daughters LLC, granting my son expanded managerial authority. I signed a personal guarantee amendment I did not read closely, and I will come back to that one, because it nearly cost me everything. Every one of them, I photographed on my kitchen counter before I signed and after, with the date visible on the microwave clock, and I emailed the photographs to Gideon Ashford's office from an account my children did not know existed. Here is what I did not sign. I did not sign a durable power of attorney. I did not sign a transfer of the trademark. I did not sign an assignment of the commercial lease on the Drayton Street building. And in April, 5 months before that dinner, 3 weeks after I found the third payment to Tybee Coastal Consulting, I had quietly moved 3 things into a separate Georgia entity called Bell Street Holdings LLC, which Gideon set up and which I own outright. The federally registered trademark for Mabry and Daughters. The recipes, all of them, deposited as a written work with a copyright registration, which cost me $65 and made Gideon laugh out loud when I asked. And the lease, not the business, not the equipment, not the accounts, not the trucks, not the point-of-sale system, not the cheerful grage paint. Just the name, the recipes, and the right to be in that building. Camille laughed at me in 2013. Nobody's stealing biscuits. They took me to Dr. Priscilla Boone in the second week of November. Dr. Boone had been my physician for 19 years. Her office is in a low brick building off Waters Avenue, with a receptionist named Charlene, who has 3 photographs of my sourdough on her phone. Camille had a folder. My daughter walked into my doctor's office with a Matila folder, and she put out her hand. And she said, "Thank you so much for fitting us in. We've been so worried." Dr. Boone shook her hand. Then she turned to me and said, "Rosalind, how are you feeling?" Camille started to answer. Dr. Boone did not look at her. They ran me through it. The date, the year, the president, the city, the name of the building we were sitting in. Draw a clock, reading 10 past 11. Count backward from 100 by 7s. Remember 3 words, and then tell me what they were. After we talk about something else, explain what people mean when they say a stitch in time saves 9. I answered every single question. Then Dr. Boone asked what specifically they were concerned about, and Desmond said there had been financial confusion, and Camille said I'd refused a transfer that we all agreed on. Dr. Boone looked at me over her glasses. "What transfer did you refuse?" I said, "A $300,000 draw against the business line of credit that I did not authorize and was not told about until after it was requested." The room went very quiet. Desmond's jaw moved. Camille's smile stayed exactly where it was, which was worse. Dr. Boone closed the manila folder without reading a page of it, slid it back across the desk and said, "I'd like to speak with Rosalind alone." Camille said, "We can stay. We can give context." Dr. Boone said, "I have all the context I need this morning." Desmond stood up. "Doctor, with respect," she said, and she did not raise her voice one bit. "Rosalind is my patient. You are her ride." When they'd gone out, Dr. Boone came around the desk and sat in the chair beside me instead of behind it. She said, "Do you feel safe in your home?" And I sat in that chair, 69 years old, a woman who had employed 22 people at Christmas, and I could not answer her for almost a full minute. She wrote a note that day, 2 pages. Cognitively intact, oriented times, 4, no evidence of impairment. Patient reports family pressure regarding financial and residential decisions. Patient declined referral to social work at this time. She signed it and dated it and put it in my file, and 11 weeks later that piece of paper was worth more than the building. They moved me on a Thursday. I want to tell you why I went, because this is the question I've gotten more than any other, from strangers and from family, and from myself at 3 in the morning. I own my house. It's a small blue house off Habersham with a fig tree in the back that Roy planted the year before he left and that I've never been able to bring myself to cut down. Nobody could make me leave it. Legally, they had nothing. Gideon told me that flat out. I went anyway, because a 30-day voluntary stay at Willow Bend Memory Care, arranged by 3 adult children who had just tried and failed to have their mother declared incompetent by her physician of 19 years, is not a nursing home admission. It's evidence. Georgia law has words for what my children were doing. Financial exploitation of an elder person, undue influence, and the language in my own trust, which I wrote in 2004 and which they had never once read, permitted me to suspend discretionary distributions to any beneficiary upon credible evidence of coercion, misappropriation, or the involuntary relocation of the grantor. Involuntary relocation. Gideon had circled that phrase in blue ink and pushed the page across his desk to me and said nothing at all. I packed my own suitcase. I put in my reading glasses, 4 books, a photograph of the 3 of them on the front steps in 1994, and a spiral notebook. I had been writing in that notebook for 2 years. Every conversation, every date, every dollar, the Tybee Coastal Consulting payments, the Thursday Desmond told me not to worry. The Sunday Camille came by with her laptop and asked for the bank's routing number for a vendor. The night I woke at 1 a.m. because I'd heard something and found my spare keys on the counter, out of the drawer, in a place I never keep them. Room 214. The nightstand, the plastic under the sheet, my children, and a grocery store cake. Camille kissed my cheek. Desmond studied the parking lot. Nadia cried on schedule. And they left. And the door clicked. And I sat down on the bed, and I opened my notebook to a clean page, and I wrote the date and the time and the words. They did not ask what I wanted. Down the hall, the woman called for Bernard. 3 days later, on a Sunday, Camille stood on a stage at the Hyatt Regency on Bay Street to accept the Savannah Business Journal's Small Business Leader of the Year award. I know exactly what she was wearing because it's on the website. Cream suit. Mother's pearls. My mother's pearls, actually. My mother's, from Baxley, Georgia, who cleaned rooms at a motel for 30 years. She had prepared remarks about legacy, about stewardship, about the responsibility of the second generation. And at approximately 6:40 p.m., while she was still on that stage, her phone was lighting up in Anthony's jacket pocket, over and over, because Marisol Reyes was calling from the bakery. The Halloran Mills truck had come at 4 that morning, the way it had come every Sunday for 22 years, and the driver had not unloaded it. He'd stood at the back door with his clipboard and told Marisol the account was on hold, then Duval Dairy at 5, then the paper supplier. Then, at 9 a.m., a woman from Coastal Georgia Community Bank had called the store's landline to say that the business line of credit had been frozen pending review and that the personal guarantee securing it had been called into question by the guarantor. The guarantor. Here is the part my son never understood, in all those years of folders and charts, and that patient, amused voice. Every single vendor account, every net 30 term, every credit line, every lease, all of it, for 38 years, had run on one signature, not the company's. Mine. Halloran Mills didn't extend credit to Mabry and Daughters LLC. They extended it to Rosalind, who bought her first £100 sack from Halloran's father in 1988, and paid cash because nobody would give her terms. Duval Dairy didn't have a contract with a limited liability company. They had 31 years of me. And on the previous Monday, from room 214 at Willow Bend Memory Care, using a phone my children didn't think to take, I had called every one of them personally. Not to threaten, not to explain, just to tell them where I was living now and who had put me there, and to ask whether they were comfortable continuing to extend credit to a business whose owner of record had been relocated to a memory care facility against the recommendation of her own physician. Not one of them was comfortable. Bill Halloran cried on the phone. He's 78. He cried, and then he said, "Rosalind, I'll pull the truck." Camille came off that stage holding a glass award with her name etched into it and could not get the doors of her own bakery open the next morning, because a bakery is not a brand. A bakery is flour and butter and a man named Bill who trusts you. She drove to Willow Bend at 7:20 a.m. in the same cream suit. She had not changed. She had not slept. She stood in the doorway of room 214 and she said, "Mama, what did you do?" And I looked up from my notebook and I said, "I answered the phone. I want to stop here for a second and ask you something because I've been carrying it a long while." Sitting in that room, with my daughter in the doorway and the award still in her car, I did not know whether I ever wanted them back. That's the honest thing. Everyone tells you a mother always wants her children back. I'm telling you that on that morning, I sat there and I could not find the wanting anywhere in me. I looked for it the way you look for your keys. If you've ever been there, if you've ever had to set a boundary with someone you loved so much it rearranged your body. Tell me. I'd like to hear it. Leave a comment, and tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. Gideon Ashford met me at his office the following Wednesday. He had 2 folders. The first was thin, and he handed it to me without a word. 47 bank statements. 11 wire confirmations. The Certificate of Organization for Tybee Coastal Consulting, LLC, filed with the Georgia Secretary of State in March 2022, listing as registered agent a man named Curtis Vinot of Brunswick, Georgia. And as sole member my son, Desmond Mabry, $491,000 over 26 months. Invoice to my company for freight brokerage services that were never performed, paid by my company, deposited into an account my son controlled. 9 emails between Camille and Willow Bend's admissions coordinator. The earliest was dated 11 days before the roast dinner in Ardsley Park. 11 days before, she asked me whether I'd thought about stepping back. My daughter had already asked a facility what documents were required to place a parent. The intake form. My own signature. A guardianship petition, drafted but not filed, in Chatham County Probate Court. Dr. Priscilla Boone's 2-page note, and photocopies. Page after page of my own handwriting. I touched the corner of one, and my hand was shaking, and I said, "You copied my notebook." He said, "With your permission." "Last spring." No, I said. "It's just strange. Seeing it typed up in a folder like that." And Gideon Ashford, who has never in 30 years said one warm thing to me that he didn't mean, took his glasses off and said, "That's what evidence is, Rosalind. It's grief. Somebody bothered to organize." I sat in that office and I cried for 11 minutes. He didn't hand me a tissue. He just waited, which was the kindest thing anybody did for me that whole year. Then he opened the second folder, and that's the one that changed everything. The personal guarantee amendment. The one I'd signed without reading closely, back in December, in the pile. My son had pledged the Drayton Street building's leasehold interest, and my personal residence on Habersham, as collateral against a $1.8 million obligation. Not the business line of credit, his. Desmond had been carrying gambling debt for 6 years, sports betting, mostly on an app, the way you'd order a pizza. It had started around 14,000. It became 60. It became 210. The failed restaurant group hadn't failed on its own. He'd bled it. He'd borrowed against it. And then he'd borrowed to cover the borrowing. And by 2022, he had a man in Brunswick, and a shell company, and a mother who had never in 19 years refused him a check on a wet prep table. $491,000. And it hadn't touched the sides. And Camille knew. She'd known since the summer of 2022. She's the one who found the first Tybee invoice, and she is a very intelligent woman. And instead of coming to me, she went to her brother. And the two of them worked out that the cleanest path was not to stop the bleeding, but to change whose body it came out of. The bakery had to be theirs, fully theirs, cleanly theirs, or the collateral wouldn't hold, and I had to be somewhere I couldn't sign anything. Nadia knew a little. Not the number. She knew enough to drive down from Asheville and cry with her chin up. Her price for that was the $1,200 a month, forgiven and continued, and a promise that the building would be sold within 2 years. The meeting was in my own dining room. I insisted on that. I came home from Willow Bend on day 26. I had every right to walk out on day 1 and they knew it, and I stayed 26. And every one of those days is a line in a court filing now. Gideon sat at the end of the table with 2 folders. I made coffee. Nobody drank it. Camille came in her work clothes. Desmond came unshaven and looked, for the first time in a decade, exactly his age. Nadia sat farthest from me and kept her purse in her lap the whole time like she might need to run. I said, "I know about Tybee." Nobody answered. "I know about the guarantee." Desmond closed his eyes. "I know about the petition you drafted and didn't file." Camille started to cry, and it was not the pretty kind, and it was not on schedule. "And I know about the locksmith you called on the 11th. Camille's head came up fast. "How?" "Because it's my house," I said. "He called me first." The clock in the hall ticked the way it had ticked through every dinner, every homework fight, every Christmas morning, every one of the 10,000 ordinary evenings I gave those 3 children, and never once thought to count. I looked at my oldest daughter. I said, "You were 11 years old, and you were making sure your brother did his math. That's my fault, not yours. I let you carry a house on your back before you were tall enough to reach the sink, and you learned that if you weren't in charge of everybody would be lost." Camille put both hands over her face. "But being afraid," I said, "does not give you the right to run people." She nodded into her hands. I turned to my son. "You were drowning." His eyes filled. "Yes, you asked me for help for 30 years, and I gave it every time until asking turned into taking, and you stopped being able to tell the difference. That's my fault too. I never once let you feel the bottom. I had to stop. But you put my house on a loan for a bookmaker, Desmond. You put the fig tree your father planted on a bookmaker's loan. He put his head down on my dining room table and sobbed like he was 5. I looked at Nadia. "And you disappeared," she said. "I know, you took the money, and you took the distance, and you told people you were the one who'd been hurt." "I know," she said. And she meant it, and it was the first true sentence I'd heard from my youngest in a decade. Camille asked me, and her voice came apart doing it, "Would you really do this to your own children?" 40 years, that phrase. Your own children. The password. The word that opened every door in me. I put my hands flat on the table. "No," I said. "I'm doing it for me." Nobody moved. For 38 years, I stood between the 3 of you in hunger and debt and shame and disappointment. I did it gladly. I'd do most of it again. But somewhere in there, protection turned into permission, and I handed you the key. And I have spent 2 years pretending I didn't know what the 3 of you were doing in a room I built. My voice went. I let it. I am not confused. I am not fragile. I am a 69-year-old woman who has gotten out of bed at 10 minutes to 4 in the morning 6 days a week since Ronald Reagan was president. And you will not put me in a room and take my keys and reach into my name and then tell me it was love. Here is what I did, and I want to say the terms out loud because I know that some of you are sitting there with a son or a daughter you're afraid of, and you need to hear that it's allowed. The discretionary distributions from the trust are closed. Permanently, all 3 of them. Desmond signed a confession of judgment and an installment agreement. $491,000 at 0 interest for the rest of his natural life. He will pay it back at $312 a month, and he will not finish, and that's all right. Gideon wanted to press criminal charges. The Chatham County District Attorney's Office would have taken it. I said no, not because he deserved mercy. Because I did not want to spend what's left of my life visiting my son in Reedsville. The $1.8 million is his. The collateral is void. You cannot pledge property you do not own, and Bell Street Holdings LLC has owned that leasehold since April of the year before. The lender in Brunswick found that out from Gideon in a 9-minute phone call. The house on Habersham is mine while I live. Mabry and Daughters LLC. The entity was dissolved. Let the grage paint go with it. I reopened on the 11th of March under the name I've owned since 2013, in the building I've leased since 1988, with the recipes I wrote in a spiral notebook and registered for $65 while my daughter laughed at me. Marisol Reyes is my general manager. She has 15% in writing and a buy-in schedule. And the inheritance is no longer automatic. I told them that at my dining room table, and Nadia said, "What does that mean?" "It means it's conditional. It means there is a document, and the document says that any child of mine who wishes to receive anything from my estate must, for a period of not less than 3 consecutive years, be employed at the bakery, not managing, not consulting, not directing brand, working, the 4 a.m. shift, scaling flour, scrubbing the sheeter, standing at the bench with their hands in it until they understand, in their forearms, what an inheritance actually is. Family counseling, all 3, with receipts. Individual financial accountability, audited annually by somebody I choose. And if they don't want it, they don't have to have it. That's the part that took me the longest to be able to say without my throat closing. An inheritance is a gift. It is not a right. And the person who gives a gift has the right to keep it in her pocket. Desmond started on the 2nd of April. He was 40 minutes late the first day and Marisol wrote him up. And he took it. And he came back the next morning at 3:52. He's been there 14 months. He does the poolish and the overnight ferment. He is quiet now in a way that I don't entirely trust yet. And that's fine, because trust isn't a feeling. It's a record. Camille has not come. She sold the house in Ardsley Park. She sends me a text on Sundays, 3 or 4 sentences, and I answer every one. Nadia calls. Sometimes she calls just to talk about Clay. And my granddaughter, Junie, who was 16 and sitting at that dinner table in her father's flannel shirt with her phone in her hands. Junie is the one who called me. It was the 4th night at Willow Bend. 10 p.m. My phone lit up and it was her. And she was whispering because she was in her closet, and she said, "Nana, I heard Mom and Uncle Desmond on the porch. I recorded it. Do you want it?" I have never been so proud and so heartbroken in the same second in all my life. I said, "Baby, Delete it. I said, I already know. I said, but thank you for being the one person in that house who told the truth. She works Saturdays now. Front counter. $6 over minimum, and she keeps her own tips, and she's saving for a car her mother is not going to buy her. And last month she asked me to teach her the biscuit dough. I did. She'll be the one who gets the recipes. Not because she's owed them, because she asked. I turned 70 in April. Marisol made the cake. Not store-bought. I still get up at 10 minutes to 4. Dr. Boone says I ought to stop. And I tell her I'll consider it, and we both know I'm lying, and she signs the physical anyway. Roy Mabry died in Ocala in 2019. I found out from a cousin 8 months after. I felt almost nothing. And then I felt everything, in a Kroger parking lot for about 20 minutes. He never knew what I built. He never knew that the fig tree took. If you are a parent watching this, in your car, in your kitchen, in your bed at 1 in the morning because sleep won't come, hear me. Your life still belongs to you. Your house is yours. Your name is yours. Your no is yours. And you are permitted to use it on the people you love most. And it will hurt. And you will survive it. And if you are a son or a daughter watching this, your mother is not a resource. She is not a bandwidth problem. She is not an asset to be right-sized. She is a person who is still in there, still frightened, still hoping, still capable of surprising you, right up until the last day. Love without a limit doesn't teach anybody how to love. It only teaches them how to take. Forgiveness matters. I've forgiven my children, most days, in the way you forgive weather. But forgiveness without change is just permission wearing a nicer coat. And I gave out enough permission to last 3 lifetimes. Families don't heal because everybody turns good. They heal when one person finally stops lying about what's happening in the room. Before you go, I'd like to hear from you. Have you ever had to draw a line with someone you loved? What would you have done sitting on that bed in room 214? Tell me your story, and tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is right now in your city. And if this reached you, please like the video and subscribe. Come back. There are more stories about family, about money, about the long, strange grace of getting older and finding out you still have teeth. I lost a great deal, and I found out what was never mine to lose. I still have the oven. It's in the corner of the front room now, decommissioned, cream enamel, with that hairline crack in the left door glass, shaped like a question mark. Every morning at 4, I put my hand on it before I turn the lights on. 38 years, and it's still the only thing in that building that never once asked me for anything.